The drawing of Sweden and Finland into the NATO structure is cause for concern. An agreement was signed in May that stipulates their full involvement in NATO drills and the ability to use NATO command and control and weapons systems. In return, NATO received full access to the airspace and territorial waters of these nations. I underline such steps by our Western colleagues lead to the destruction of existing security systems in the world, breed more distrust, forcing us to take countermeasures.
Well, Shoigu also said the NATO contingent in Eastern Europe has increased from 2,000 to 15,000 servicemen since 2014. So far this year, NATO has conducted more than 100 exercises, which involved up to 80,000 troops. Moscow has repeatedly denounced the North Atlantic Alliance's eastward expansion toward Russia's borders. Joining us via Skype from Phoenix is Mike Harris. He's the editor of Veterans Today. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV, Mr. Harris. Now, we have, on the one hand, Russia expressing grave concern over NATO's eastward expansion. At the same time, NATO and its allies in Eastern Europe say this is because of Russia's militaristic ambitions. What do you say to that?
NATO and the U.S., it's nonsense. What the U.S. and NATO have seemed to have forgotten is that the Soviet Union does not exist any longer. It fell apart back in the early 1990s. And they're treating Russia, an independent sovereign state, as if it was the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was indeed an evil empire, as Reagan said, because they killed the Bolshevik Jews who ran the Soviet Union, killed 100 million of their own Russian Christian citizens in order to seize and maintain power. This is not who Russia is today. Russia has changed. Russia is something entirely different. But the problem is that NATO and the U.S. need an adversary because they've lost the war on terror. That was clearly demonstrated in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. They have lost it. So in order to justify prolific amounts of military spending to keep the defense contractors with good yield for their investors, they need to invent another adversary out there. So unfortunately, Russia has been thrown into this role. China is not available because the U.S. is too economically dependent upon them for so much of their supply chain for domestic items we need in the U.S. Ergo, it defaults to Russia. And I must congratulate Vladimir Putin on being so reserved in how he's taken the aggression of NATO and the Western countries. He's been very much a statesman.
Well, Mr. Harris, when it comes to NATO, and we're seeing that Cold War mentality persist despite the fact that, as you pointed out, there is no Soviet Union anymore. This Cold War mentality is going to prevail, would it not?
Well, what Donald Trump needs to do, and I'm a supporter and fan of Donald Trump, is he needs to clean house. It's obvious that the Department of Justice and the FBI have been taken over and subverted and are operating outside of their constitutional mandates. And it's obvious that the Department of State is also operating outside of its constitutional mandates. They're operating like they have a life of their own. They're not representing the will of the American people. And it's time for Donald Trump, with the help of his voters, the American people, to clean house. I call for a full-scale purge.
Right, but Mr. Harris, these are all people that Donald Trump himself has appointed.
Well, Donald Trump is building as he goes along. You don't take over. The U.S. government is enormous in size. And so he had to put some people in place who he doesn't like, who don't agree with him, who are actively trying to undermine his agenda. But as a function of time, people will come forth who can be promoted and can be put in charge and can be trusted to do the job that the American people are counting on them. I just wish that Trump would hurry up. I mean, it's the people who are running the United States now, the senior executive service, scare the hell out of me, because these are the bureaucrats that think they can't be fired. They have their own agendas, and they're running the United States as if it was the Soviet Union. And in fact, the United States has become the evil empire that the Soviet Union was.
All right, let's leave it there for now. That's Mike Harris, editor of Veterans Today, joining us via Skype from Phoenix. Mr. Harris, thanks very much indeed for your comments here on Press TV.